Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great honor of interviewing Beth Napleton, who is a Chicago based executive leadership coach, consultant, and the owner of founder of Beth Napleton Consulting. She offers senior leaders in education and mission driven organizations a clear path to excellence through individual, executive, and group coaching experiences. Beth Napleton, who are you?
Thank you for having me here. I am a mother. I'm a single and solo parent. Um, I am a white woman. I am a sister. I'm a daughter. I'm a coach. I'm a consultant. I'm a coach sultant when those two roles are blended. I'm an educator, a teacher at heart, and the founder of a charter school. So as well as a rabid Bruce Springsteen fan and
Which one is
Chicagoan,
your favorite
at this
song?
moment in time.
Which one is Bruce?
Oh, that's a great question. And this could be, best overall song. I have to go with Growing Up. If you're talking about best in concert, I would have to say Born to Run. So, which is more kind of popular, but yes. Yeah.
I had to listen to Growing Up. Beautiful. So
Yeah,
Beth,
there's some great ones.
so
Yeah.
Beth, so we can understand your trajectory. Can you walk us through that trajectory up to this point?
Sure, absolutely. So I started my experience in education as a volunteer in college. I went to college in New York City, and I'm the oldest of 8 children. And so when I left home at 18, I found myself, I had been yearning to be around, away from children and away from the noise and hecticness. And it took me about 10 days until I realized that I missed being around kids, and they had a certain energy. My youngest sister was 4 when I left for college, so the house had a lot going on. And I started volunteering in New York City public schools, doing conflict resolution work with fifth graders. And that work really hooked me because fifth grade is such a great age, right? Kids are so excited to learn, they have ideas. And I think that when I was growing up, conflict and to this day remains something that I really had to work on. I have aversion to conflict. I have a fear of conflict. So in some ways, I love teaching the curriculum because I was learning myself about a lot of healthy ways to resolve conflict that I hadn't necessarily learned growing up. And so I started doing that. And I was in these schools. I taught the Washington Heights community, which is a largely Dominican community. It was amazing. And, I was noticing things like in the hallway, the clocks didn't work, right? And I had grown up going to Catholic school in the suburbs of Chicago. And, the first time I went, I was like, oh, it's out of batteries or whatever. And the second time, I was like, oh, like, I guess they haven't gotten around to fixing it. And then, but you think, if the clocks don't work, how does the school run, right? How do people get to lunch and recess and know how much instructional time? And it really started to open my eyes in a firsthand ways to the inequities that exist in our world. And so I think that really hooked me. I had started college pre-med, but didn't love the science classes. So switched to kind of a social justice history orientation. And I really started digging into just some of the educational inequities in our country and why they existed and what we could do about them. And that led me eventually to joining Teach for America, where I actually became a teacher at that very school 4 years later, which the first school that hooked me, PS 132, which the clock still did not work 4 years later. And it was a tremendous experience. I taught 3rd grade and 5th grade. I went to go work for Teach for America because I felt like I wanted to understand what it took to be a great teacher, and working on the admissions team there would help. And then really realized that, I had learned a lot my first 2 years teaching, but I was only getting started. So I ended up going to work at a school in rural North Carolina for 4 years. I worked with the same students in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It was in the middle of a peanut field. It was 95% African-American, 90% free and reduced lunch, and 100% of kids graduated and went to college, which
Wow.
quadrupled the college going rate in the county. And so that was really an experience where I started to see what was possible in education. And so those, I think, were the most formative parts of my experience. And then I later went on to, I came back to Chicago. I worked at a school in the area that had a very similar college-bound mission, but everything about it was, there were lots of parts about this that were just really off to me, like how it was interpreted. It's like, everyone will have this option, but then kids go to the bathroom and read in line for the bathroom. And I love to read. Nobody reads in line for the bathroom, right? Like that's not something people do. Like,
Yeah.
why are we making our kids do this? Why are we making our Black and brown kids do this? We make our white students do this. Like, can we talk about what this actually means in study schools? And so I realized that the principal was a newer manager, and I had seen that in my career is that, the tricky thing about becoming a principal is, often that you are promoted from some kind of role that starts in the classroom. And that is one job. And then the roles on the way to and including the principal are different jobs, right? And so it's like you're all Olympic divers, but you were training on the 3-foot springboard, and then you go to the 10-foot platform. And it's like, I mean, sure, I've worked in a school. I understand schools. I get this. But hey, when my 5th graders had problems, they were in 5th grade, right? When they had tantrums, well, but they're 10, right? Like we're working to regulate feelings. How am I working with a 40-year-old woman who is having the exact same issue? And so how do I decided to really learn more about how to be an effective leader and manager. So I went to go back work at Teach for America. I ran their training institute in Los Angeles for 3 years with 5 full-time staff, 100 summer staff, 600 teachers we trained. And that kind of taught me a lot. And then I really missed schools and teaching. So I went back to start the school in the Roseland community on the far south side. So we started with 4th and 5th graders and graduated the first group of students in 2021 with, I think there were 25 seniors and 325 college acceptances. So kind of those are a lot of the experiences that really shaped me. And then here I am in 2021. And 2018, actually, I was going through a lot personally. I was going through a divorce. I had 3 small children under the age of 6. And I just realized that I had made a commitment to get my students to grow my school to full capacity. And I'm a really good starter of things. I'm a Gallup Strengths activator. I'm like great at starting, great at new stuff. I am not the best leader when it comes to always sustaining or kind of maintaining the status quo. And so I knew that it would probably make it would make sense to have a transition. And I started thinking about it in 2018 and kind of playing with lots of different possibilities. And really it came down to when I sat in the principal chair, I later became the CEO or executive director of this small, 1 middle school, 1 high school, small district, basically. And when I sat in those chairs at various points when I got stuck, there were 3 or 4 times I could point to where a consultant or a coach I had started working with really helped me get unstuck and get to the next level. And so I felt like, it was so hard for me to leave work in schools because it's so impactful. And I felt like, you know what, though, like, where can I still make an impact? And I think I can still make an impact doing coaching and consulting because I know how lonely and challenging the leader seat can be. I know how isolating it can be. And I know that in my own experience, it made a difference. And then that also would give me the flexibility to parent my 3 small children solo, and do the school pickup and all that stuff that, when the nurse calls, somebody's there to be able to go get them. So yeah, that's really what led me. And truthfully, it was August of 20. I kind of thought, well, maybe I can make it to 2022, 2023, get a few of the first few classes, have some great victory laps, enjoy these college acceptances, kind of soak in the impact of what we built here. And then the pandemic hit, and in August 2020, I was like, this is 2021. 2020. I was like, this has to be my last year, because there were so many pressures. Because the nurse was calling, oh, your kid needs to be home for 10 days, and I was like, virtual school. And I knew that I had a successor. I had been working with my high school principal to take over. She was ready. She had energy. She was hungry. And I was like, great. So my first class graduated, and I graduated with them.
Wow, that's a long trajectory.
Sorry. Well, it's a wordy answer, but
it's very impressive. Let's try to peel that onion. Let's start with, do you remember the day that you decided to become a teacher? And Why were those reasons?
So I remember I was in college. It was maybe, I don't know, the fall, and all these recruiters were coming to campus. And tech and banks and consulting firms. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was in law school a couple years older than I was. And I was like, I don't know. I went to this thing for Martha Stewart's website. I feel like that could be cool. I mean, the web was like a fairly new invention. This is like 1999, right? So that was like so exciting. And I had been doing all this work leading this conflict resolution organization, which was the largest volunteer organization on campus at that time. And my friend just said, what are you doing? This is not who you are. You should join Teach for America. You would love teaching. This would be great for you. This is like so the natural course of action. I don't know why you're like looking at Martha Stewart's website. And it was just like something hit me over the head. And I was like, you're right. I love doing this work in schools. We designed a new curriculum for the fourth grade. Like in retrospect, there was a lot of foreshadowing of the work that I would later like doing, right? With like bringing in curriculum, thinking about meaningful learning opportunities, kind of increasing programming. And so that was when I realized, like, right, this is what I should do.
Wow. And then you work in New York, and you work. Did I hear North or South Carolina?
North Carolina.
You work in North Carolina, very different
Mm-hmm.
environments. It seems that the school in North Carolina students were succeeding more. What was different? If you will have to
Yeah.
summarize between the school systems.
So interesting. I think that and I kind of said, I really appreciated the leadership my first few years of teaching. I was at a school of I think at the time it was like 1,700 kids, right? There were a principal, 3 assistant principals. My second year, I taught third grade, and we had our whole building that was just third grade. It was like 12 third grade classrooms.
Wow.
And the assistant principal in particular of third grade was a really important mentor to me. But I really felt like I had 3 principals in 2 years. I feel like I learned a lot what not to do. And so when I went to North Carolina, and I had kind of found this school, I was on a business trip. It was the year I was working at the Teach for America National Office. I was on a trip to see kind of like rural education in action. And we went to a school that had been founded by a Teach for America alum. And, it was a small school. There were 60 kids in each grade, right? So I think size was helpful. And I think there was a nimbleness in the leadership, both because of the circumstances, like you can just be more nimble in a school with 2 classes a grade instead of 12, and because of how it worked in the system. They work directly with the state, which has its pros and cons as their own LEA. But when you're thinking about these large urban districts of now, I've worked in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. When I led the training institute, it was there. It's just a big ship to move. And
Yeah.
so it can be hard when you are in a building and you've got, this experience well, right? Like this central office requirement and then this piece, and then you've got what the parents want. And so in some ways, when you reduce the layers, it's helpful. I'm not saying that this is the way all schools should be structured. I'm not saying, there's a role, there were a lot of costs to that. I later learned running my own small charter school, right? That where it could take up time and energy. But I do think that there was a nimbleness, and I think that there was a lot of fostering collaboration. And there was a really aspirational vision. When I joined that school, there were 3 groups of kids in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. And it was, we're going to college. You're all going to college, right? And there's a lot to say about, I think I've done a lot of growth in my own evolution about lots of opportunities that don't include college, right? There's a lot of great post-secondary opportunities.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, people would always say to me when I was starting my school in Chicago, like, well, maybe not all kids are meant to go to college. And I was like, do you say that to the principal of your child's school? Because if you do, I will engage in this conversation. But spoiler alert, they never did, right? It was something they thought about. Black kids from the far south side of Chicago. It's like, well, maybe they're not college material. And it's like, absolutely not. Like, it's our job as educators to make sure that students have the choice, right? They can get into college. We've prepared them for post-secondary. And if they choose to enter the military, go to trade school, start an internship, start a tech company, that's great. But it's not because they couldn't pursue a post-college degree or a post-secondary degree. And so I think that there was in this school in North Carolina, it was the nimbleness of the leadership. And it was the aspirational vision of what we wanted to accomplish. In New York, it was more about like, please do not do this, this, and this. Like, here's the floor, don't go beneath it, right? And I get that from a risk management perspective, but it also made it difficult to like pitch in and work for something bigger, or feel like I was part of something bigger, doing bigger things.
Like where, like you have worked in New York and in North Carolina. It seems Dominican population in New York, African American.
Mhm.
Do you can you pinpoint the moment where you noticed that you had a that you wanted to work with populations like those?
Yeah, I think in some ways it really stemmed from that college experience because it was clear from day one in September 1996 that part of the reason the clocks weren't working in the school is that it was virtually all immigrant students, right, from the DR or Puerto Rico. And the Catholic school that, my sister, at the time I taught fifth grade in Washington Heights. My sister was in fourth grade at the same school I
Mm.
went to because we
Mhm.
are 14 years apart. And I used to go back to, at Christmas break, and this is before the internet, before Common Core. I'd be like, what am I going to teach? you know, and I'd ask her, or I would go to the teacher who was considered like the most rigorous teacher in our building and be like, what are you teaching your students? And then I would go and I would also ask my sister, and the most rigorous teacher who had, the greatest classroom was doing work far beyond in fifth grade what she was being asked to do in fourth grade. And it was so clear to me that there were issues of race and class at play. And I
Mm.
think that always became for me the piece that was about closing these opportunity gaps, equalizing the system, social justice, and making a more righteous world. I've never worked in a school or a district that had fewer than 80% students free and reduced lunch. Now, a lot of my clients I work with work in more diverse schools or they work with more affluent population. At some level, the
Mhm.
challenges of schools are the challenges of schools. But
Yep.
for me, education is a social justice mission. And so that was really what motivated me to like dig in and work in communities that often have the greatest need.
Beautiful. Then you go to LA to train other leaders.
Mhm.
What were one or two lessons you learned doing that work?
Yeah, I think I learned so much about leadership in that experience. Um, I think that one lesson that comes to mind kind of builds on that idea from North Carolina of the common vision is that not only do you need to have a vision, but then you also need to think about how various groups know and understand that vision. So it was very important that my full time staff was deeply steeped in what this looked like. And that's really what we spent so much of our quote unquote off season working towards. And for my summer staff who came on as a summer job, it was important they had some knowledge of it, but also it was simple. It was clear. There were rallying cries. And I think that earlier in my career, visions can be complex. Schools are complex. There's lots of pieces going in. And I felt like everybody has to understand this complexity. And I really realized, and I think LA taught me that what you actually have to do is make it simple. Like the job of a leader is to make the complex and understand it simple. So there's like a rallying cry, people get it, they're bought in, they know what they're doing. And we used to do these like weekly all staff meetings on Sundays. It'd be like, I'd have like at one point I was like singing a song that was like a Will I Am song, but like rewritten about like what our goals were. But it was like, it has to be so simple and clear. Because if I wanted the 100+ staff members to be able to like go out into the week and charge it, how did I really reduce it to its most simple and important essence? And then really spend the whole week, by the way, like giving people thumbs up and green light when they're doing it, spotlighting them. And then when they're not, it's yellow light, red light. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to do to get back to that student learning goal that we had set.
Beautiful. I lovely. Then you come back to Chicago, and of all the things, you decide to open a school. What were some of the lessons learned?
Well, yeah, there were a lot. So, and I started a school. I always am careful to say, because I think that it can be a really hot topic, district schools, charter schools, different parts of the country. To me, looking back on my career, I had seen the nimbleness that was possible in the charter sector. And I also felt like I had a long list of things I had to do if I wanted to be a CPS principal. And I didn't really want to do those things, take those exams and do that. So I felt like, oh, these two things couple together. But great schools are great schools, regardless of governance type. And, sometimes despite governance type. And so I think that I really learned a lot, again, with talking about this vision. And I actually work sometimes, probably about 25% of my clients now are starting schools or want to start schools or have approval and are going to start. And it's interesting because there's so much work in planning and opening a school and things that you never think about, like, will there be vision insurance? What color is the office painted? That have actually very little to do with, curriculum and instruction and students learning. And so it's so complex, but you have to be able to, again, simplify that vision. And I now have to be able to do it in like an elevator pitch way, where if I'm standing outside the supermarket getting petition signatures to open, or if I'm talking to a prospective parent, how can I distill the essence of our school into the most important qualities and understand that different people can engage in different ways? And so I think that I definitely learned that importance. That was a huge piece of it. And I think that, I think that probably, like many things, I don't know that I always knew how much work like on the front end, you think this is a great idea. People are getting their doctorate, right? Oh, this is a great idea. And it's like, you're in the middle and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much, but I'm already halfway there. So let's keep on going. So I think that it reinforced, what's your North Star? What's your why? Why do you want to do this? And I work a lot with leaders I work with on sometimes remembering that. How do you get that? Because that's what fueled you through the tough times, right? Your why, your purpose, right? That's what got me. I mean, there were days I would leave the building at 1 a.m, just working so intensely. And that was not a lifestyle I could keep going with. It was not a lifestyle I wanted. But when I remembered why I wanted to do it, to make sure there was a great tuition-free, open enrollment, college prep option in this community that hadn't had one, that was able to fuel me through the fire.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing with us all that journey. Let me ask you, like in Back to the Future, if you could go back to any of the positions you held in the past, what will the Beth of today tell the Beth of back then?
So I think the first thing I would tell the Beth of any point in that time pre-2018 would be to start meditating, because I started meditating in 2018 and I was kind of hit or miss for a few years. Like, I wasn't super consistent. I was exploring, I was learning it, but it has really become a very regular part of my life. And I truly think it has made an unbelievable difference in how I lead and how I interact with my family and kids. And so I feel like that's what I would tell her. Like, please start meditating. This is going to be so great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us about your journey with meditation. I mean, it's something that a lot of people talk about, but nobody really talks about how you start, because it's really like going to the gym, and you have to maintain that habit in order to make it work. And many of us try a couple of times and we think, oh, this is a waste of time. Can you tell us about your journey with meditation?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's very similar to the gym. I mean, I also came to exercise later in life, probably 2016. So a couple of years before meditation. And it's one of those things, you always read these articles. What can you do to help your mental health? What can you do to be better? And it's always like, drink more water, eat healthier, exercise, and meditate.
Simple.
And yet we're like, but isn't there like a sweater I can buy that'll make me feel better? Is there like a pack of gum that if I chewed that, that would be easier than going to the gym? And so I think, you hear something over and over again enough times, you think, oh, I should probably give it a try. And so I think for me, and I had done I worked for a while in 2016 and 2017. And again, this is another time a coach was really helpful. I worked with a woman that I used to work with, Chrissy Heine, who had gotten very into fitness and nutrition and did these challenges for people, like a 5-day challenge, a 30-day challenge. And that was, I had twins in 2015. I was not feeling my best self body-wise. And I started doing her challenges as a way to kind of do these short spurts of experimenting with cutting sugar from my diet, meditating, exercise. And Chrissy did an amazing job, and it was wonderful. And I think that in one of those, you're in these groups, and it was very much choose your own adventure, but some people would choose meditation, and it would kind of like, huh, like that's, so you hear people talk about it, you hear them think about this. And so I decided to learn more about it. And so I read a book called 10% Happier. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's by
I've
Dan
heard of it.
Harris, who, yeah, he was a anchor at Good Morning America who basically had like a panic attack on air, I don't know, years ago. And that led him to discover meditation. What I liked about this book was that it was a really good blend of like very practical, action oriented, boom, 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 which partly is who I am. I mean, I was a principal for many years. There's like some element of that. And then also here's the spiritual benefits, here's the health benefits. And this idea of, if this can make you 10% happier, and I'm sitting there thinking 10% is a big difference between 70 to 80%, between 80 to 90. So I should give this a try. And in the book, he talks about some things to try. There was an app. I found the app to be very useful. And so I kind of started, I would do it occasionally and dig in and out of it. And then I noticed I always felt better when I did it. But how do I make the time? How do I figure out how to do this? And then in 2020, when the pandemic happened, I started doing it more frequently because I had more time and was also looking for some good resources. And in 2020, January 2021, I had signed up to do a mindfulness-based stress reduction course through the University of Massachusetts, which was like 2.5 hours, 3 hours every week for maybe 10 weeks. My children's father had passed away suddenly in December 2020. I was now a solo parent, parenting 3 grieving children. And I think I had actually signed up for this course before then. And it was, thank God I did, because that was a regular time every week that I showed up on Zoom and I learned about meditation. And then the homework was to meditate for 45 minutes a night, every night, which was like way more than I had been doing. But that really helped me to see the benefits. That really helped me to ground myself at that difficult time. And I will not say I have not kept doing 45 minutes. That would be amazing. That's been hard for me to squeeze into my life. But what I learned is that if I start my day right away with 10 or 15 minutes of meditation in the morning, and then later I might do some if I'm feeling stressed or before I pick my kids up from school or before a big meeting, I found that it's very grounding. And there's an app that I use. This is the blend of wisdom and productivity because I use this app called Streaks, I think, where you can keep track of how many days in a row you've done something, which I find very motivating. And
that is orange. It's an orange color, right?
It is an orange. Yes, I have it right here. Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can see my there we go. So I've already meditated today. I'm at 160 mornings in a row. And so that's kind of helped me. It just reinforces that habit. And the beauty of it is that even if I only meditate for 1 minute, it still counts. And so even when I oversleep and the kids are like, I can do a minute. And then lately there have been a lot of other changes. We're moving. And it's like, maybe I should wake up and do like 30 minutes because I need to kind of amp it up. Life is getting crazier. So how do I amp up my self-care strategies to reflect that?
Wow. What a great example of blending productivity with wisdom is using an app to make sure that you keep the streak of your meditating. I noticed that I forgot to ask you what lessons have you learned about being a principal, and what lesson have you learned about being a coach?
Yeah. I mean, principal, I think, is the most fun, exhausting, challenging job in the world. And I think that, one thing I sometimes will say is the view looks easy from the cheap seats, right? If I'm in the cheap seats at Wrigley Field, I have lots of comments on how the game is being run. But I am sure that if I went down to the dugout and was the one managing the game, I would understand just how challenging it could be. And so I think that my time as a principal, which I did for a couple of years, and then I kind of transitioned to becoming the executive director, CEO. And then I had a principal resign actually January 1st, 2020. And the school needed some help. And I was like, I'm stepping in. I'm going to fill this the rest of the year, which of course was like the most exciting semester of education in American history. So I got to lead through the COVID shutdown. And I think that, it's a complex job. If you can imagine like the dashboard with, that a pilot sits at, it's like a principal has 250 levers to pull on any given day, and they all interact with each other. And that's one of the reasons that in my work, I am a proud generalist. Like people say, well, don't you want to focus on this? Or don't you want to focus on that? It's like, look, if I'm a leader and I've got 250 dials, I don't want someone who can only help me with two, even if they're two very important ones. I need somebody who can help me understand how does my vision for change, help me develop my vision for change, think about the change management process, and then help me when people are really upset about it. Help me at the meeting of the board when there are tough questions. Coach me through how to make sure that this really impacts students as quickly as possible, but without going at a pace where the adults feel like it's too much. And so it's been a really, I think that being in that role really taught me the challenge of being at that dashboard and thinking about what do I pull and when do you kind of keep going and speed up no matter what people say, and when do you listen and slow down. And so I think that was one that really stuck out. And then I think the lesson as a consultant and as a coach consultant, because that's really my favorite thing to do is, I use consultants. I would get these beautiful decks. I would put them in a drawer and tempting to pull them out. And I never would, because, I would have a teacher quit, or I would have an enrollment challenge, and I didn't know how to make that plan work with my current reality. And so what I like about coach consulting is that we come up with the plan, I do the work, I make the fancy deck, I do the research, I do the focus groups, whatever it takes to solve the particular problem that you need some outside help and capacity with as a leader. And then we work to implement it, right? We want the plan to be good enough and to be a good plan. But then it's like, I'm working with a principal now who, in the time of COVID, right, a lot of goals kind of went out the window, right? Yeah. Because we didn't know what to do. We weren't measuring. Well, how do we bring goals back? And how do we make a process that invests people and creates them? How do we make sure that next school year we can progress monitor? And so I'm helping him with this process and the Excel spreadsheet and the dashboard. And I'm going to help facilitate his team leadership retreat, right? Because that's going to be a place where he can see, and he can then have the benefit of being a participant, which is the rarest of luxuries in that leadership role. And so it's been interesting to see. And I think what I've learned from being this coach consultant, and from, sometimes I just do straight consulting or straight coaching, is that, I always tell people, you are special, and your school is special, or your network or your nonprofit is special, but you are not unique, right? Your problems, somebody else has had them. Like I don't know if I've ever seen anything in 2 years of business that I have either not experienced or known someone who's experienced, because in a lot of ways, it gets down to some of our basic humanity, right? People don't like change. People are afraid. People, parents are fearful for their children and just want them to grow up to be healthy and happy. And there are so many things in our world that get in that way right now. And so I think that, and every school is special and every place is special, but it's just not unique. And so I think that's one that has really, I continue to find that reinforced with every client that I work with and I work with people all over the country.
What a great conclusion, right? That sometimes we are involved in a situation and we feel so unique. It's only happening to me, when in reality, a hospital is a hospital. There's crisis in all of them. We can learn from each other. Thank you for sharing that. Let's take a quick pause to celebrate the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So, Beth, as you know, reading is a luxury, and this can be books, audiobooks, Kindle, newspapers, whatever. If you will have to gift 2 books, one fiction and one nonfiction, which one will those books be?
So I would gift to any leader, and a lot of times I do send this to leaders. I have a couple books I often will send to leaders I work with, but one that I love is Radical Candor. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, I did a Twitter thread on it a few months ago. Wow. Absolutely, yes. Tell us
I
why
love it.
radical candor. What should
Yes.
we know
So
about
radical
radical
candor,
candor?
the short headline is radical candor is at the intersection of caring personally and challenging directly. And so I discovered this book when it first came out, I don't know, 2017-ish, unclear. And, I think for me as a leader, caring personally has always come very, very easily. But challenging directly has not. Go back to that history from my
Mhm.
childhood about conflict and conflict aversion. And, then you add in concerns about teacher turnover and talent and how am I going to find someone? And I hate hiring and whatever that I actually don't hate hiring, but what I'm saying here. And so I think that book really gave me a framework for understanding how challenging directly actually is a form of caring about someone, how feedback is a gift, which is something that I had always believed and to varying extents had put into place. And this just gave me an easy way to understand it. And so my leadership team read it, right? My principals read it. We started really making a big push through our network for it because what I realized was that we had a kind of a culture where people would like agree at the table but disagree in the hallway. And it had to be the
Mm.
opposite. I need you to disagree at the table and have robust, conflict-filled, productive discussions about if this was or wasn't a good idea. But then when we're out with parents, students, faculty, I need you to agree. And so there was people they weren't challenging directly, and it was really at the detriment to our organization. And so as I was thinking about where to, again, that simple leadership, we need like one theme for the year we're focusing on, and for staff culture, what is it going to be? It was radical candor. So people read the book, we had little stickers made, we put them places, we gave awards for when people did this. We talked about the 4 quadrants, right? There's radical candor, there's obnoxious aggression, there's manipulative insincerity, and then there's one, I forget the other one. But anyway,
Yeah, the four.
you have to read the book
Yeah.
to find out. That's my teaser for the book.
And it's in the cover of the book.
It
Yes,
is. It
yes.
is. It's over on my
Mhm.
shelf now, but it's a great one. So I really found that to be helpful, not just for my own understanding, but then what I love about a good nonfiction book about that is that you can read or do the synopsis or the Blinkist or whatever with your team, and then you all of a sudden have this common language. You can use this common language. It can help you to build a better school, right? And so I just think it's fantastic.
Beautiful. Great
So that
book.
would be my nonfiction
Awesome.
book. Yeah.
What about
I
your
think for
fiction?
yeah. So it is a book called Homegoing by Yag Yassi, and it is amazing. I picked it for my book club book a couple of years ago because it is just one of the most amazing books I've read. It takes the story of, I think it's 2 brothers, if I'm remembering correctly, in Ghana in like the 15 or 1600s, and one of them is captured and sold into slavery, and one of them is not. And it follows not only them, but it follows, I think, 8 generations of each of their families. And so I think that sometimes equity is important to me, social justice is important to me. I feel like you can understand these things from literature and research and nonfiction, but this does such a powerful job of showing the impact in a family of something that happened 400 years ago, and how trauma goes down through generations, how the choices that our ancestors made affect where we are today, how our choices affect our ancestors 300 years into the future. And it is heartbreaking and inspiring and amazing. And I think it does a really good job of showing what that looks like on a very micro level.
Wow, thank you so much. That's one I haven't read. It's now going to be in my to-do list of reading. I appreciate it. So awesome talking to you today. Beth, let me ask you, who are your biggest influences?
So professionally, I think that my biggest influence is probably the principal that I had in North Carolina. And even though we worked together, we worked together closely for 4 years, he's remained a valued friend. We actually sometimes do some projects together, even still. But I think that those 4 years, I learned so much, not just from him, but from the collaborative atmosphere that he fostered, from the friends and colleagues I still have from those days, and kind of with this idea of we're all learning and this kind of orientation towards that. And so I'd say Caleb Dolan was probably one of my biggest influences and helps. And, lots of people from afar, right? I try to look at women I admire who have big jobs and have families. I like learn a lot about leadership from Bruce Springsteen, who I have not met yet.
It's gonna happen. It's
One
gonna
day.
happen.
Exactly. So I think I really try to look to, other people for inspiration with whatever I'm grappling with in that way.
I am quite fascinated as a principal by principals. My dissertation was studying how successful principals do what they do. If can you tell us more about this principal that inspired you so much in North Carolina? What did that principal do that would you say was extraordinary?
Yeah, that's funny. We used to use the word extraordinary a lot at that time, so it feels very right. I think far and away, Caleb is humble, and you hear about humility, and humility is a value, and humble leadership. And look, like everything in life, taken to an extreme, it can be every light has a shadow side. And he was, but to me, he was always willing to listen, to consider ideas other than his own, to think about what he believed and where he was firm on, and what he was open to other ideas on. He was constantly learning. He would say, "Oh, I heard this on NPR this morning. You should check this out." Or, "Did you see this article about this?" Or, "We should go to this conference." And also, I think that it was a good example of sometimes leaders feel like we have professional relationships. It is just professional. It's just at work. And that absolutely can be the case in some, but it's also okay. I mean, this work is hard work. It comes from, who we are. Most of my really good friends I've made in adulthood have been people that I've worked with and who I've managed or who've managed me. And there is a way to do that and to understand and be able to embrace that and navigate that. We would always go out for Mexican food, the one Mexican restaurant in this town of 1,000 people. But, 4:00 and 5:30, maybe on Fridays after staff development, everyone was welcome. We'd swarm there. You'd have a margarita. You'd laugh about the week. You'd talk about, your challenges and sorrows. And it was really wonderful. And he could do both. He could lead the PD. He could hear ideas. He could be the expert. He could tell you what you didn't want to hear. And he could have a margarita with you and, give you a pat on the back when you needed it. And so I think that really Caleb was an exceptional principal and also had that strong vision for not just what was possible with our school, but also for, how can I share this learning with other schools? How can we invite educators from without the state to see? And he really was unrelentingly focused on excellence in a very well-rounded way in teaching. So it wasn't just about scores, but it was about a love of learning. It was about kids not being able to put their book down. It was about researching projects independently. And so I think he was able to really, we had a bunch of teachers like me who were not the most experienced, but were hungry. And it was a perfect match because probably a little more experience would have been great, but, people were able to really grow and flourish. And I think that, one of the things that, when I think about the people who taught at that school almost 20 years ago now, so many of them have started their own schools, led schools, helped write Get Better Faster, right? I mean, just amazing. And I think it really, that place, I was the president of the school board of Cincinnati. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I think in some ways it was this incubator because it really was about this vision, this collaboration. He knew what he stood for. He wasn't like, how do you think we should run the school? But he was open to learning more. He understood and could say, this is not an area I know as much about. And he was able to kind of help others on that journey.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let me ask you one more question. You said that this principal, or let's just talk about the principal figure and you as a coach, asking you as a principal to a coach. I have tried both let me spend time outside of school with my peers when there's a social committee event. I have also tried, I'm not going to socialize outside of school. And I'm always trying to find the perfect balance. Some people have said, you go, but then you leave before everybody leaves, or you stay until the end. What advice do you have for principals who want to develop good relationship with their teachers, but also keep that balance between, leadership and socialization? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So two thoughts, and I think this comes up all the time. And also as school staff shift, maybe what you did 2 years ago, even at the same school, right? How do I think about this? So I actually once, when I was a dean of instruction, I dated a principal who used to say, you always go to happy hour and you have one drink and then you leave, or two. But you always, you go, but you're not the last. And you give people, they need time with the principal at the table and they need time without the principal at the table. And I thought that was really, really wise. And then I also work with leaders who really want to be their authentic selves. But, our authentic selves can be very vulnerable. I have a certain reputation I need to maintain, a certain piece. There might be parts of myself that are sensitive and I don't want to have this open at work. That's my work self. And so, I always tell people, think about three things that you can be so authentic. It's really who you are. It's not related to school. It's not related to your professional roles. And you could talk about and mean that. And those are the topics. So for me, it was always my kids and Bruce Springsteen, right? We're always there. Sometimes the third topic would float in and out or whatever. But I was always like unleashed with topics, right? In those areas. And that allowed me to feel like I am being authentic. I really care about my kids and Bruce Springsteen very much, right? And sometimes like I got very into exercise. So, my exercise habits and how I did it and those personality quizzes and street, totally open door. And in other stuff, it would be like, this is for me, this is private, right? Like I was getting divorced, like my struggles in my marriage were private. Now, like people knew and I would tell people like, hey, I'm going through this, and they knew. And maybe one or two people I had particular relationships with, there was more openness, but not more broadly, right? And so I think that it was helpful for me to always think, and helpful for principals to think, like, what are a few things that I just feel like I can be totally myself about as parts of my personality, and engage in that way. And then, the other stuff can be for you. It's important to keep some stuff that's just for you, or that's for your friends or your family or your spouse or whoever.
Great advice.
And this is all about groups, right? Like I think that individually there can be deep relationships. I mean, when I got divorced, my chief operating officer was a single mom who had gone through a divorce maybe 5 years earlier. I mean, she was unbelievably supportive to me, unbelievably helpful, was really my mentor as I was navigating this. And so that was a very deep bonding personal experience. But it wasn't like I was going to a staff meeting and being like, so, but like, trust and believe, anytime there was Bruce Springsteen news, I'd get like 10 texts from staff members like, did you see that Bruce is coming to Chicago? Like, have you got tickets yet? So it was a way that people, because the beautiful thing about these three things is it also gives your staff, like, they don't know how to, like, how do I do this? I've got this new principal. How do I say this? And when you're open about this, it kind of invites people in to connect with you on those elements. And people would say, I know so many of my staff members like, oh, I love New Edition. New Edition is my Bruce Springsteen, right? And so we were able to really connect in that way across.
Beautiful. That's a great advice. Thank you so much. Let me ask you, at some point, we all feel that we might not be good enough, maybe not smart enough, attractive enough, or a specific shade or size. And psychologists call this imposter syndrome. How do you address this in your professional life?
Yeah, I think this certainly comes up a bunch, and it's fascinating. I think that a couple of happy things I do, which like, I think there's like this level of like accepting yourself. And this is where meditation comes in, like sitting in uncomfortable feelings and accepting yourself and saying, where is this coming from? And so I do all that stuff, or try to, but I also really like just like, what are the practical tips? So I have a file in my email called Read This on a Bad Day. And whenever I get a little like, like a note from someone expressing gratitude, or something that, oh, this was the best proposal we've seen or whatever, I'll put that in my email. And I know that folder is there. And actually before email was quite as ubiquitous, you used to get like notes and stuff from students. I had like a Ziploc bag that I would keep in my desk drawer that had like notes and gratitude and whatever. And so that always knows that like, if I'm really feeling like, can I do this? That's like a great place to go for a pick me up. And then I also, I kind of joke about this is like, but I think about like celebrity mentors. I mean, I really look to women who have had big jobs and who have raised kids. And, Michelle Obama has been a mentoring lots of different ways. And I, will buy every book she writes. I'll watch her, late shows. I really try to view it as like, this is my friend Michelle, and like, I'm learning from her and figuring this out. And then, then I became a single parent, then I became a solo parent. And so, now like Mindy Kaling is a solo parent, right? And so I feel like my friend Mindy, I like follow her on Instagram. I think about this. And in some ways, it's like, if she's doing this, so can I, right? Or here are other great coaches and consultants who are also women, who are also paving their way. And so I try and kind of find my spiritual tribe in that sense.
Well, I thought I was the only one who had spiritual mentors, but I love that you say that, because I agree. I tend to follow those people that inspire me and talk to me, and perhaps they had gone through similar experiences. And everybody should do that, right? Find good mentors out there to follow who are doing great things. Thank you so much. So let's talk about your productivity. So you, for being successful, as you know, everybody has their own systems of getting things. But often we don't talk about this. We just see the performance when the stage is open, but then the curtains close and people don't notice what we do to get organized and stuff. So tell us about your thoughts on this.
Yes, I love this topic. And I feel like the years of 2003 to 2013, 15, this was like maybe my number one interest. And so, because I was always trying to figure out how to make more time in the day. So I do a couple things that have actually served me through all these different roles and all these tests of times. And a lot of this I have to attribute to, I don't know if you've ever read the Together Leader or gone to any of the Together Leader trainings. Maya Hike Merlin is phenomenal, and she does a lot of work as leaders. How do you create these systems? Maya actually, I was a summer staff member at the Houston Teach for America Institute in 2005, and Maya was my manager. So even before she did all this, she was kind of had a big job, and this comes to her very easily. It does not come to me easily. And so I think that as someone who I don't approach the world, sometimes my teachers would be like, but you're so organized. I'm like, this is a skill I've had to build. This is not my natural way of interacting with the universe. And so a lot of her work really touches on this. And so one of the things I do is she talks in her book about an ideal week. And so what would your ideal week look like? And when would you exercise? When would you wake up? When would you spend time with your significant other? When would you have your check-ins and meetings? When would you do your deep thinking work? And I joke that whenever I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, I got to go back and do a new ideal week, because part of it is I don't always know what my vision is for how I should be spending my time. Even yesterday, it was Friday afternoon, and I had a bunch of stuff I still needed to do. And I was like, something is not working for me about my ideal week, because I'm not building in time to do some of this deliverable work. And then I'm stressed and overwhelmed on the weekend. So I need to go back to my ideal week. And once I have that vision, it allows me to really function. And then part of what she recommends is then doing a weekly kind of meeting with yourself, where you're just looking at your week ahead. What are your priorities? How do they track to your goals? And I have been doing that on Fridays lately, which there's another time management expert, Laura Vanderkam, who I like a lot, who is a mom with a big job and 5 children. And so she writes all these kind of hack books and what you can do. And she talks, I used to plan on Fridays, and then I really decided I like planning on Mondays. And her most recent book, Tranquility by Tuesday, got me back to planning on Fridays, and it was terrific. And so I do that on Fridays. I typically lay out my priorities for the week ahead. And I do this, by the way, professionally and personally, because, Maya will talk about, you need to have it all on one calendar because you're one person. So you cannot be at the pediatrician's appointment at the same time that you have a board meeting. And if those are in 2 different places, you can easily make that mistake. And so when everything's on one calendar, it acknowledges that there's only one you and you can only be in one place. So those are some of my favorite tools that I, no matter what, use to stay organized.
Yes, Robin Sharma calls exactly that the blueprint for the week, and he and basically have everything in the calendar. But to the nitty gritty, when you say in the calendar, is that like a physical calendar? Is that a Google calendar? What should we learn about that?
Great question. I like both. I do all digital, all Google, and I do that because when I was for two reasons. One, it allows everybody else the insight into it. People are sending invites. I'm not double transcribing. And when I was married, my husband and I used to do a family meeting. It's kind of similar to me with ourselves. We'd like, what are the family, who's doing the grocery shopping, the laundry? We've got this birthday party. Are we going? I mean, you think about some of the stuff that can really, you have to make time for this. At some point I realized, like, if I had a direct report at work going to talk about the social schedule with, I would sit down and talk with them about it. So we used to do family meetings, and we could put everything on. We have I have my work calendar, and that has all that stuff. I then also have a separate Google Calendar that is my family calendar. And so right now, my babysitter has access to it. I have access to it at various points. My parents have. They don't always use it because they're not so Google Calendar savvy. So I've learned that I just have to text them and say, remember,
yes,
tomorrow is. But it doesn't deter me from using it. I just know I have to build in a few more systems. And then what I do is on my desktop, both are always visible. So that's how I kind of get to, how do I know that my boys have a field trip at the same day that I'm doing this, is that I view it as one calendar, but they are a little bit separate. And then if something is, so for example, this week, the end of the year school picnic is coming up for second grade, and I have 2 second graders. So I put it on my the family calendar, and then I invited my work self there so that nobody could schedule a meeting over it. Nobody would know that. But if it's things like they went on a field trip to the Botanic Gardens this week, I wasn't going. I put that on the family calendar. I could see they had it. I knew I'd pack a disposable lunch bag and do all that, but I didn't invite myself to it because I wasn't going on that particular trip. So, and then I also have learned, it's been so weird with COVID, is that if there is travel time involved, to block that. And so I'm doing an exercise challenge coming up this month. And so I really was deliberate about, and I will say that sometimes it's like planning your exercise, and it's like, look, I've got a big job. I've got 3 kids. They need childcare if I leave the house. And so I try and do some stuff during the workday or some stuff when they're in after school. And so I've learned, like, if I have an 8:30 exercise class, I need to book 8:15 to 9:45. It accounts for travel there. It accounts for showering after, because I can't do a client call at 9:30 if I ended an exercise class 20 minutes away at 9:15. And it sounds basic, but also it has like given me some peace of mind and buffer to just start to honestly put those, like, operationalize boundaries, right, a little bit in that way.
That's a great advice, and often it doesn't happen, right? We just put meeting, and never about the time to do the human things, like commute and taking a moment to go and take a shower, etc., etc. Thank you so much.
Totally.
And when you're writing to your clients and to different places, how do you manage that, and how do you manage your inbox in your email?
Yeah. So when I'm doing like client work or client, so I've used a tool called Boomerang before, which is great. Are you familiar with it? It's,
yes.
I love Boomerang. And the reason I love it is because even when I'm emailing at crazy times, because again, single mom, and one of the things that I really try and do is, I am a big believer in, like, when you're off work, you're off work. It's more rejuvenating, it's more helpful. And it is easily enough for me to wake up a half hour before my kids and cruise through some stuff. But sometimes people see I'm emailing at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and they get a little bit like, oh, so with Boomerang, you can schedule when you send stuff. And so I love that, because I think that allows me to get the work done at a time that truly works for me. And then especially when I was leading schools, I model as a leader, hey, I actually do work during working hours. And for me now, I'm like, I don't want my clients to know that I sometimes am up working at 5 a.m, because it works. And because, by the way, I'm going to the picnic, which is from 11 to 2 in the afternoon. So to me, I can trade these things.
Yes.
But you don't want to create the idea that, like, I'm on call or I'm constantly available. And so that allows me to do that. I do, for some of my clients, part of our work is I'm always on call. If I'm your coach, you can text, email, call me, but they have that information, and they know, if you want to get in touch with me, you can always text me, hey, do you have a second? Can we figure this out? I do a call on the way to school so that people, oh, this thing happened. What do I do? And so that has been helpful. An email, I have like it's so complicated. Email?
No, inbox zero.
Email. No, I've done that at various times. I think it can be useful. I drive myself a little crazy with it. So one of the things, I think that my best 2 email things is that I try to limit checking to a few times a day. So I try to say I do a morning check, I do a lunchtime check, and I do an end of the day check.
Yeah.
I'm sometimes better than others about actually closing and checking it. But I found that if I started my day with email, it would often dictate my day for me. It would pull me off. And so I really try and start my day with my most thinking heavy work. That's when I work best. It's when I'm freshest. It's so if I'm doing like a new marketing strategy or if I'm doing a big deck for a client. And then I'll check my email because my thinking is if it is an emergency, it is not an email, right? Like if it is really time sensitive, they know how to call me, they know how to text me. And so it's not in my email. And so I need to not treat my email like an emergency because it's not, it's a place to correspond. I would not go to my mailbox and sit there all day and wait for letters to come in. And so like, I need to do the same thing. So that has been helpful is when I limit email to a few times a day. And part of it, I have some people on my team and sometimes if I need to get in touch with you. So we use Slack for that, which is helpful. And we've set norms. And this is something I work with leaders on all the time, by the way, is how do you do this with your teams? How do you set norms about hours to use it and how and where? And it's going to be different for different people, but that can often be a really important part of resetting a leadership team culture is just basic norms around communication. When do you text? When do you email? How often do you set a response? I'll work with people, especially principals over the summers. Often people will want to do like a 1-day intensive with me where it's like, let's just reset this stuff for next year. Let's make sure this makes sense with your team's needs. And that's helpful. And the other piece I try and remember with email is that it's a little bit like gremlins. The more you email, the more your email grows. And so it can be so tempting to cross something off the list and get this email done and send this email. But like the more I do that, the more emails I'll get back. And I don't always love that. And so how do I remember to use it strategically?
the in ping pong, you throw the ball and you're like, okay, I'm done. But the sooner they receive it, the sooner that ball is gonna come back to you.
Exactly.
Boomerang and scheduling emails are great because number one, if you send an email when you're in crazy hours awake, it sends the message to the other person that you want them to respond at that time as well, which is not your intention, right? It's definitely not your intention, but it's definitely implied by accident by sending a wee hours. So scheduling emails is great. And it also, like if it is, for example, Friday afternoon and you send an email and they respond to you on a Saturday, it like the ball is in your court and it gives you this anxiety that you need to respond when it's not necessary. So it's so important to use technology to make your quality of life better. I love that.
Yeah.
So Beth, when the curtains close and the kids are asleep and it's Beth the human, what do you do for fun?
Great question. I am trying to have more fun in my life. Right now, I do a lot of reading. I love to read, and I have found that I read. And what I've noticed recently is that after my kids go to bed, I will sometimes read. I find that I can spend hours in a fiction book. And I like reading nonfiction, but it's not that kind of relaxing to me. So I'll read like a chapter of a nonfiction book. Then I'll often watch, I've started to get back into great television. So I'm all about Succession right now. I'm fascinated by it. I'm very late to Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I'm there. So like, I'll try and do a show. I'll try and make plans with friends, maybe a couple times a week to go out or to see a concert or an experience. But I will say, I think part of the productivity, and this is maybe part of getting older, is I also just try and be really consistent about going to bed, right? And just have a time I go to bed, and it's so boring and so blah, but I just, and it can be hard because that quiet time at night is just for me and I want more of it. And what can I do? But I have really noticed the impact with my kids and on my own brain power the next day and how I feel. And so I try to give tomorrow's Beth a good chance by tonight's Beth being in bed with my, nice fiction book by 10:30 or whatever, so that I am there. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. What an interesting.
And I believe in scheduling that in too. By the way, all this is scheduled.
Going to bed.
I look ahead to the week. The meeting with myself, I look ahead to the week, and I'm like, am I seeing friends? Do I have a social outlet? Is there anything I'm like really excited about? And even on the weekends, right? We try and say as a family, like there's one thing all of us are excited about with whatever weekend, which sometimes involves some negotiation. So.
Awesome. So scheduling also the fun stuff. That's great. Because we are so often so focused in the career and we forget ourselves, our humanity, and we cannot do one without the other.
Amen.
Beth, this has been a great interview. Any last thoughts you would like to share with the viewers and listeners of the show?
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much. No, I mean, look, I think leadership, what you were describing earlier about this feels so different. No one's gone through this. I feel so isolated. And I think that feeling is very real. And it's one of the reasons that people can find great value in working with coaches and consultants, because it's another perspective. You can be no filter with them, which truthfully, as a leader, is very hard to find a place in your building where you can just remove the filter and go. And I think that can, so I urge leaders to think about that, like, where do I have that in my life where, and a lot of people say, oh, my partner listens to me. Well, that's great. And your partner doesn't is another important role in your life. There's a good partner that can listen and understand, but they're not going to help you strategize your action plan for staff change. And that's probably not good for your relationship, right? By the way, too, if that's the case. You have other interesting pieces. And so I think that, I want leaders to know that it is, it can be isolating, and it doesn't have to be. And if you feel that way, you're not alone. Everybody has been there. I think that I try to always put on my webpage and my social and my LinkedIn and Instagram and all that, resources and actionable tips and kind of helping people feel less alone. And so I think that if that's useful, people can certainly go visit my website. I'm going to have a quiz up there in a few short weeks if we get this right on what you need most as a leader. And so I think that, yes, I'm very excited about that. That should be coming out, I think, in the next few weeks. And so really it is, and it's so important. I just so appreciate, how you have to feed the human part of yourself, right? These things work together, right? It's the old, Michelle Obama, my, spiritual mentor, always says, you have to put your own oxygen mask on to take care of other people. And I think that's so true. And so, and when leaders are struggling with that, which happens a lot, right? How do you help kind of stop, reevaluate, figure it out, get your oxygen mask on? Because this is really a marathon, not a sprint, right? We're not going to solve all the problems in education by the end of the school year, right? And so,
absolutely,
not by the end of either of our careers, probably. And that can be disheartening sometimes. If we work hard, we make the mark we can, we pass it on to the next generation. And, if you're feeling overwhelmed or it's impossible, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to think about this, and it's okay to get help and support, because you deserve it as a leader.
Amen. Beth, where can people find you online?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Beth Napleton, and Instagram and Facebook is Beth Napleton Consulting. And then bethnapleton.com is my website where I'll put this podcast up, and I'll put all those resources. I blog a couple times a week, usually, sometimes once a week, but about different topics. And so, that's a great place to find me. And I'd love to connect with your listeners.
Beth, this has been great. Thank you so much for giving us, sharing with us your wisdom and your productivity.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez.
Chulo.
And I love that production. Chulo out.